Scott Arniel's master plan has just been revealed. This offseason, the Winnipeg Jets have experienced a lot of roster turnover, losing key players like Nikolai Ehlers and Mason Appleton. This has presented a unique and interesting opportunity to the youngsters in the Winnipeg Jets system to potentially finally make the jump to the NHL. Today, we're going to be talking about these players in the Jets system who I think is most poised to crack the roster this year, and of course, we're then going to project who I think will be on the roster to start the season. But before we do hop into the video, it looks like about 82% of people watching the videos here on Jets Digest have not subscribed to the channel. I'd highly suggest you throw a subscription. We're talking Jets all throughout the offseason and leading into the new season. We're getting closer and closer day by day, and more news will be coming down the pipe. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a beat. But now, let's hop into the video. Let's talk about these players who I think can make the roster this year. And in order to do so, let's take a look at the roster itself and take a look at where there is some holes, where some players could jump in. Now, we're going to look at the forwards first and foremost because I think this is where there is the most amount of players who could make the jump to the NHL, but also at the same time, there are the most holes for the Winnipeg Jets to potentially fill. We can take a look and see that there have been some interesting additions to make up for the loss of Ehlers and Mason Appleton, notably Jonathan Toews, Gustav Nyquist, Tanner Pearson, Cole Koepke, and I think all of these players will likely make the roster this year. However, I could potentially see a player like Tanner Pearson, who, has been not as good in recent years and is getting a bit older. I could see him being potentially a player who maybe doesn't cut it. But again, paying him $1 million to come here to Winnipeg, I think he likely has a spot on the team. But like I said, nothing is certain, and training camp can change everything. A player comes into a training camp and turns heads, they will make room for him, especially considering the fact that Tanner Pearson isn't a long-term solution for the Jets. He's just a guy they decided to throw in there. Let's take a look at the press box situation, and I think this is going to be the situation going forward, having one forward and two defensemen in there. Of course, there is David Gustafsson, a player who I've liked in the past few years for the Winnipeg Jets, but at the same time isn't irreplaceable or anything like that. So I could definitely see him potentially losing this spot in the press box. And also, it is very important to consider the fact that Adam Lowry is currently injured, which presents another interesting variable, considering the fact that Lowry will likely be coming off of injury around December, January, around then, and so the Winnipeg Jets will have to send a player down to make room for Lowry rejoining the roster, so potentially waiver exemption may play a factor here, and in the past has also played a factor in decisions at the start of the year. But regardless, let's hop into these players. Let's talk about who I think are most likely to make the jump to the NHL this year. And we're going to start it off hot with one of my favorites, a player who I've talked about many times here on the channel, Nikita Kucherov. A player who I've talked about many times here on the channel, and the reason why I see him as the most likely player to make the jump to the NHL this year is because I think he is a perfect candidate to fill the Mason Appleton role on the Winnipeg Jets, playing on that third line with players like Nino Niederreiter and Adam Lowry. Maybe it'll be Jonathan Toews. Who knows? We'll see how that ends up going. But the main thing is, this player presents, a version of Mason Appleton that I like a little bit more. He's got a great motor. He is physical despite the fact that he is smaller. He's got great hands. He has a good shot. I think that this guy looks like a solid middle six player for the Winnipeg Jets for the coming years ahead. He had 4 points in his 5 NHL games, and last year playing on the abysmal, terrible Moose, he had 18 points in 30 games. And also, just to put that into perspective, the highest scoring player on the Moose last year was Mason Shaw. He had 37 points in like 70-plus games. So having 18 points in 30 games is very good for Nikita Kucherov. And in the games that he's played in the NHL, he has been very good. Like I said, he had 4 points in his 5 NHL games. He scored in his first game. And in general, like I said, just presents to be a perfect, replacement player for Mason Appleton. It'll be interesting to see if he can make the team. He is waiver exempt, so potentially he could be a guy who's on the team to start the season. And then, midway through the year, when Adam Lowry comes back, he could get sent down if he's not, performing as well as we'd like. Or maybe he makes himself, irreplaceable. And I mean, hey, that's a great problem to have. But regardless, let's move on. Let's talk. That's enough about Kucherov. We can talk now about Jarrett Anderson-Dolan, a player who is a little bit different, isn't considered like a prospect for the Jets, but has bounced around to many different teams and has never really been able to stick the landing at the NHL level. Last year in 51 games with the Moose, he had 19 points. He is a bit older. He's about 25 years old. He's skilled, but he has less of a ceiling than players like Cheveldayoff or any of the other players we'll talk about shortly on this list. And he requires waivers. So the fact that he requires waivers, maybe if the Jets want to hold on to this guy, they could potentially keep him with the NHL team, and that would avoid having to put him on waivers. Of course, then you'd have to put like a Tanner Pearson or a David Gustafsson on waivers. So that doesn't change that problem. But the main reason why I think he could make the jump to the NHL this year and stick it out with the Jets, we saw him play with the Jets near the end of the season last year and as well in the playoffs. And he definitely did not look out of place. I thought he looked solid. He scored, I believe, a very important goal in that first round against St. Louis. I thought he looked really good. And the fact that he played on the Jets last year for part of the year, I think will give him some credence with the coaches, as well as I think he was poised to make the roster at the start of the year last year. Unfortunately, he got injured in the preseason games, and that's why he ended up spending most of his time with the Moose. But regardless, that's definitely a possibility. Next, let's move on to the more, I would consider those past two guys as the most likely players to make the roster this season. Now we're delving into the, possible, but it would surprise me territory. And let's talk about Brad Lambert, the boom or bust prospect who's had a very interesting development. I believe he's played on 5 teams at 4 levels, played in 3 World Juniors, played through the pandemic, had injuries. This guy's had a crazy development, situation. But has kind of stuck the landing a little bit. Again, last year he had 35 points in 61 games. Again, the Moose were terrible, so I don't put that on him, unfortunately. But, he's gotten better over the past season. He is a unbelievably smooth skater. He has, when he's skating, his hands are in motion with his feet. He looks good. He's slippery. He's evasive. He can play on the half wall or the point on the power play. The biggest thing is that he is a boom or bust prospect. And the reason why I think it's definitely possible for him to make the roster this season is Kevin Cheveldayoff even came out when he was asked about, the loss of speed, losing a player like Nick Ehlers. He mentioned that Brad Lambert could potentially help out with that, considering he is also a speedster. And like I said, we've seen him get better every single season. Who knows how his offseason is going. If he comes into camp and makes himself irreplaceable, he has something that the Jets desperately need this year. Getting older and adding players like Jonathan Toews, Gustav Nyquist, Tanner Pearson, these older, slower players. I think an injection in speed with Brad Lambert would be key. But like I said, he has to come into the training camp and he has to make it clear that he is here to stay. So it's all up to him. But he is also waivers exempt. So again, same type of situation as Cheveldayoff. If he comes in and makes himself known, he can get a bit of a test run with the Jets. And if it's not working out come December, when Adam Lowry comes off of injured reserve, potentially then you send him down. And just to round out the forwards who could potentially make the roster this year, let's talk about the player we traded for in the Rutger McGroarty deal, Braden Jagger. A player who is very, very interesting. I expect him to start at the AHL level this year. He's only played in the WHL these past few years. Of course, you can take a look here. He had 82 points in 54 games, which may look very, very good, but you also have to remember he was 19 years old, playing against 16, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds. It's easier to beat up on those younger players at that level, and it's pretty standard for a player after their draft year to, get a bump in points when they play in the WHL again. But the main reason I think that he's going to end up playing in the AHL is because I just think that the Jets want to see him playing against men before they push him up to the NHL roster. The way that, the possibility of him playing in the NHL, the reason why I think it is still possible is the type of game that Braden Jagger plays. He's always been, not the flashiest player stats-wise offensively, but what he's known for is the fact that he plays a very detailed game. He's a smart player. He wins faceoffs. He's good in the offensive zone and the defensive zone. And that makes it definitely a lot more appealing to a coaching staff because you can play him in a third line role, in a fourth line role potentially. I would say probably not the best idea for his development to play him in the fourth line, but regardless, the point is he can play those roles. He can play the PK. He can play the power play too. He has a lot of tools in his bag, and in general is just a smart player. He's a good skater. He's got a good wrist shot. He's a playmaker. He just has a lot of tools in his bag, but I personally just see the Jets looking at this guy and going, okay, let's see what he can do against men in the AHL. And then after that, if he shows that he is, ready to go, then maybe we'll bring him up. But regardless, he is waivers exempt. So again, same type of thing with Lambeau and Chibrikov. He could potentially be the guy they say, hey, let's give him a chance on the roster this year. And, by the time Lowry comes back, we'll push him back down. But regardless, a very interesting player. I'm really excited to see what Jagger has to offer for the Jets. And then the final thing here, I didn't pull up any sort of stat sheets for these guys. There's players like Kobby Barlo, who, again, is a prospect in the Jets system who could potentially make it. But like, this is one I'd be, I think this is a big long shot. The only reason why I think he could make it to the Jets is he has an NHL caliber shot. He's already got an NHL, frame. His physicality wise, he looks like a man rather than just a teenager or, a 20-year-old. But at the same time, I just think there are so many more players ahead of him in line that it would be really, really strange for him to make the roster this year. And also, he's only played 3 games in the AHL previously. Again, same type of thing as Jagger playing in the OHL. I just don't see him making that jump this year. Now, we can talk about the defensive side of things. And this is probably where most of you guys are going, hey, I think you're forgetting one guy. I think there's one guy who I'm expecting you to talk about on the defensive side of things. And we'll talk about him right away. But before we do that, let's take a look at the actual composition of the defensive, the defensive core right now for the Jets. You can see there is Josh Morrissey, Dylan DeMello, Dylan Samberg, Neil Pionk, Hayden Fleury, and Luke Schenn. My apologies. Those are the guys who are penciled in currently at the, in the starting roster. And if we bring back up the press box situation, there's also Colin Miller, who, in my opinion, is a better defenseman than Luke Schenn. So I think that he definitely has a lot of value and will likely stay on the roster. Logan Stanley is a whole other thing, but regardless, the Jets have put a lot of time and effort into him. However, I think they have kind of soured on him a little bit after this past playoffs, especially giving the reins over to a player like Hayden Fleury instead of Logan Stanley. I think there's a lot of stuff to come on the defensive side of things. There is a logjam right now, and I think that is something that we'll have to get dealt with, considering the fact that all of the players who could potentially make the roster require waivers, essentially. So Logan Stanley requires waivers, Colin Miller, Luke Schenn, Hayden Fleury, all these players require waivers if they are not going to make the team. So it makes it very, very hard for a player like Elias Solomonson to make the roster this year. However, I think he is definitely poised to at least turn some heads in training camp and make the decision very, very hard for Kevin Cheveldayoff and Scott Arniel. The reason for that is, first of all, just to talk about him, for a long time now, he has been a minute muncher in every league that he's played in. He played in the AHL with the Moose this past season in 53 games, had 27 points. Again, very good for a defenseman, especially considering, again, the fact that the Moose were terrible offensively. Definitely a big thing for him there. Further to that, he is a minute muncher. He's a great skater. He can jump up to the rush. He's comfortable under pressure. He is a 6'2" right-handed player, right-handed defenseman, which is, something that, teams covet. He's good at separating the puck from players, and he's also good at making the first pass. The reason why I am a little bit skeptical about him making the team this year, I really hope he does, to be very clear. I think he should, and I think it would be good for his development to play in the NHL this year, because I think that, he's already shown that he's solid at the AHL level. We might as well continue the ball rolling. But I know that the Jets are looking at him as kind of a bit of a comparable to a player like Dylan Samberg. And Dylan Samberg's development, they've come out and said they want to develop him like they developed Samberg. Samberg had 2 years in the AHL, and again, looking at the logjam in front of him, I think it's going to be difficult for him to make the roster on a regular basis. So it's definitely a difficult situation for the Jets, but I think that he's going to come into training camp, turn some heads, and make the decision very, very hard for Chevy and Scott Arniel. And then the final player we have to talk about, just because he is a player who could potentially make the roster this year, despite what you may think, it's our boy Villian Hanola, the black sheep of the Winnipeg Jets defense core. A player who has been poised to make the Jets for 3 years now, probably. Definitely in the last 2 years, he's had some very terrible luck, getting injured in training camps both times, despite looking very good. And, at this point, we've seen that Logan Stanley is ahead of him in the depth chart. At least, you can kind of glean that in general. And on top of that, the type of play style he has, I would say is kind of, at least visually, similar to a player like Hayden Fleury, and we know that the Jets trust Hayden Fleury. So I think that if Villy wants to make the team this year, he has to come in, into training camp and show that he is taking this roster spot and no one else can take it from him. It is completely up to him. He also has to get lucky injury-wise. But, it's just a sad situation seeing a player, who I had a lot of hope for. I thought he had a lot of potential. Again, luck with injuries has been tough for him, as well as when he has had his chances, he's never really fully grasped and fully, taken the spot, for himself. So again, it's all up to him to make sure he comes in this year, and proves himself. But in my opinion, with the fact that he's not waivers exempt, I think he either one starts the team with the AHL, or another team goes, hey, we'll take that off. We'll take him off of waivers. We'll take him from you, or a trade, or whatever it is. But my guess, by the end of this year, Villian Hanola is not going to be a Jet, which is disappointing. But regardless, like I said, it's up to him to prove himself, and we'll see what he can do. But regardless, that's going to be it for me here. Tell me if you think I was wrong. Who do you think is the most likely player to make the Jets roster out of camp this year? But have yourself a wonderful rest of your summer. I'll be here breaking it all down on Jets Digest, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.